It's an exciting time when you're preparing to take the Security Plus exam. It's a well-known certification, and I know I was really excited when I got a chance to take it, study for it, and take it. That led to me going on to CISA Plus and Pen Test Plus and getting my master's degree in cybersecurity, and it's really a fascinating field, and I hope you are as excited to begin this as I was. Domain 1 of the CompTIA Security Plus certification, General Security Concepts, is focused on foundational principles. This domain represents 12% of your exam. In this lesson, we'll cover 4 major areas that form the bedrock of cybersecurity knowledge. Think of this domain as building your cybersecurity vocabulary and understanding the fundamental principles that everything else builds upon. Whether you're defending a network, implementing controls, or responding to incidents, these concepts will guide your decisions. This course is considered an intermediate level course because it assumes you have foundational knowledge of computer systems, networking basics, and general IT operations. Ideally, you should understand concepts like IP addresses, DNS, basic operating system functions, file systems, and common network protocols. You should also be familiar with basic computer hardware components and how they interact. Taking the CompTIA A+ Core 1 and Core 2 version 15 certifications and the Network Plus V9 certification is an excellent starting point that will give you this foundational knowledge. However, even if you haven't taken these prerequisite CompTIA courses, you can still grasp this course content. You might just need to do additional research on some technical aspects if you're new to IT and find anything confusing. Don't let that discourage you. Cybersecurity professionals come from many different backgrounds. As we move through this course, I want to share some effective study strategies that will help you succeed. First, take active notes during each lesson. Don't just listen passively, but write down key concepts, definitions, and examples in your own words. This helps reinforce your understanding and create handwritten flashcards for important terms and concepts. There's something powerful about the physical act of writing that helps with memory retention. And after each section, pause and try to explain what you've learned to someone else or even just say it out loud to yourself. Don't worry about talking to yourself. It's completely normal, but regardless of whether that's true or not, the benefits outweigh the cons. If you can teach it, you can understand it. So trying to understand and teach can really help cement some of these ideas and concepts. And don't just memorize definitions. Focus on understanding how different concepts relate to each other and when you would use each one in practice. The Security Plus exam will test your ability to apply knowledge, not just recall facts. After we complete our study of all 5 domains in this course, the 6th section is a practice test section with 2 full-length practice tests designed to mirror the real exam experience. The first practice test covers domains 1 through 3, focusing on general security concepts, threats, and vulnerabilities, and security architecture. The second practice test covers domain 4 and 5, concentrating on security operations and security program management. These tests are primarily multiple choice, but they also have some fill in the blank and some multiple selection select all that apply questions. We don't have the capability yet within this platform to mimic the PBQ questions that you'll get, and you'll only get between 1 and 5 at the most. Typically, it's about 3 in the CompTIA exam when you're doing it live. These practice tests in this course are invaluable for identifying areas where you need additional study and for getting comfortable with the question format and timing you'll encounter on exam day, and they're also great learning tools. Let's start with security controls. The tools, techniques, and measures we use to protect our assets are our security controls. Think about different types of locks and security measures you might use to protect your home. While many people rely on just a door lock, more secure homes might also have window locks, motion sensors, security cameras, and an alarm system. Similarly, cybersecurity requires multiple types of controls working together for comprehensive protection. Let's overview what we'll be covering here. Security controls are categorized in different ways: by their function, by how they're implemented, and by when they activate. 10 different types of security controls include technical controls that use technology to enforce security, preventive controls controls that stop incidents before they happen, managerial controls that provide policy frameworks, deterrent controls that identify when something goes wrong, physical controls that protect tangible assets, corrective controls that restore systems after incidents occur, compensating controls that provide alternatives when primary controls aren't feasible, and directive controls that guide user behavior. Each of these plays a crucial role in a comprehensive security strategy, and understanding how they work together is a key to building effective defenses. Technical controls are the technology-based solutions that automatically enforce security policies. Examples include firewalls that block unauthorized network traffic, antivirus software that detects and removes malware, encryption systems that protect data confidentiality, and access control systems that verify user identities. Think of technical controls as your automated security guards. Once configured and deployed by IT personnel, they enforce security policies automatically without requiring moment-to-moment human decision-making. While humans still need to configure, maintain, and monitor these systems, the controls themselves operate continuously and make security decisions based on their programming. Here's a test-taking tip. When you see exam questions that mention software, hardware, or systems that automatically block, detect, or enforce something, you're likely dealing with technical controls. Look for keywords like firewall blocks, antivirus detects, system automatically, software presents, or encryption protects. If the question describes technology making security decisions without a human having to intervene in that moment, it's probably a technical control. Preventative controls stop security incidents before they happen. They're your first line of defense. You've got firewalls preventing unauthorized network access, security awareness training preventing social engineering, physical barriers like locked doors and security gates, and input validation preventing injection attacks. Preventive controls are like putting up a fence around your property. They deter and block threats from reaching your assets. For exam success, watch for questions that ask about stopping or blocking something before it happens. Key phrases include prevent unauthorized access, block malicious traffic, stop attacks before they occur, or deny entry. If a scenario describes keeping something bad from happening in the first place, rather than detecting it after it happens or recovering from it, you're looking at a preventive control. Managerial controls, also called administrative controls. These are the same thing, basically just different terminology. These controls are all about the policies, procedures, and processes that tell people how to implement security properly. Think of these as the rule book for your organization's security program. They don't involve technology directly, but rather establish the framework that guides all your security decisions and activities. Examples include security policies and procedures, risk assessments and security audits, personnel security measures like background checks, and incident response plans. Managerial controls provide the framework and guidance for implementing security throughout your organization. On the exam, look for questions that mention policies, procedures, documentation, training, or governance. Key phrases to watch for include security policy states, procedure requires, training program, risk assessment, background check, or incident response plan. If the question is about what people should do, how they should do it, or what rules they should follow, rather than what technology does, you may be dealing with managerial controls. Deterrent controls discourage attackers from attempting an attack. Warning signs and legal notices are examples. Security cameras in visible locations. Deterrent controls work psychologically. They make attackers think twice about targeting your organization. For test questions about deterrent controls, look for scenarios that emphasize discouraging or dissuading attackers rather than actually stopping them. You might want to watch for phrases like warning signs, visible security cameras, legal notices, audit trail, or strong penalties. If the question describes something that's meant to make an attacker reconsider their actions or choose an easier target, you're dealing with a deterrent control. Operational controls are day-to-day security measures implemented by people. These might be security guards performing physical patrols, system administrators applying security patches, help desk personnel verifying user identities, and backup operators ensuring data protection. Operational controls bridge the gap between policies and technology through human implementation. On exam questions, operational controls are often identified by human actions and daily activities. Look for phrases like security guard patrols, administrator applies patches, operator performs backup, staff member verifies identity, or technician monitors systems. If the scenario describes people actively doing security tasks as part of their regular job duties, rather than automated systems or written policies, you're looking at operational controls. Detective controls identify when security incidents occur. Examples could be intrusion detection systems monitoring network traffic, security cameras recording activities, audit logs tracking system events, vulnerability scanners identifying weaknesses. Detective controls are like security cameras. They don't prevent incidents, but help you identify and respond to them. For exam questions about detective controls, look for scenarios that involve finding out something has happened or is currently happening. Key phrases include intrusion detection, audit logs show, monitoring reveals, scanner identifies, alerts notify, or discovers unauthorized access. If the question is about identifying, detecting, or alerting after an event has occurred, rather than preventing it beforehand or during an event occurring, then you're dealing with detective controls. So you don't want to get that confused with corrective controls that are fixing afterward, but it's still detective is detecting something, identifying, recognizing something is happening or has happened during or after. And physical controls protect physical assets and facilities. These could be locks, barriers, access control systems, environmental controls like fire suppression, equipment securing measures like cable locks, visitor management systems. Physical controls protect the tangible assets that support your digital infrastructure. On the exam, physical controls are usually easy to spot because they involve real-world tangible security measures. Look for questions mentioning locks, barriers, badges, security guards, fences, biometric scanners, surveillance cameras, environmental controls, or facility access. If you can touch it, see it, or walk through it, and it's protecting physical assets or controlling physical access, you're likely dealing with physical controls. Corrective controls restore systems to normal operation after an incident. Backup and recovery systems, incident response procedures, system restoration processes, patch management systems. Corrective controls help you bounce back from security incidents and return to normal operations. For exam questions about corrective controls, look for scenarios that happen after a problem has already occurred and focus on fixing or restoring things. Watch for phrases like restore from backup, system recovery, incident response procedures, patch deployment, rebuild systems, or data recovery. If the question describes actions taken to fix damage, recover from an incident, or get back to normal operations after something bad has happened, you're looking at corrective controls. Compensating controls provide alternative protection when primary controls can't be implemented. If you can't encrypt a database, you might implement additional access controls. If you can't patch a legacy system, you might isolate it on a separate network. Manual processes, when automated controls aren't available, are also examples of compensating controls. Compensating controls ensure you maintain security, even when ideal solutions aren't possible. On exam questions, compensating controls are often found in scenarios where something can't be done the normal way. Look for phrases like cannot be implemented, legacy system limitations, budget constraints, alternative approach, workaround, or in place of. If the question describes describes a situation where the preferred security control isn't feasible and asks what you could do instead to maintain security. You're dealing with compensating controls. Directive controls guide and direct user behavior. Security policies that tell users what they can and cannot do are directive controls. Also, procedures that outline proper security practices, training programs that educate users about security can be, and standards that define security requirements. Directive controls establish the rules of the road for security in your organization. For exam questions about directive controls, look for scenarios that involve telling people what they should or shouldn't do. Watch for phrases like security policy requires, procedure mandates, standard specifies, training teaches, guidelines recommend, or acceptable use policy states. If the question is about rules, instructions, or guidance that direct user behavior and tell people how to act securely, you may be dealing with directive controls. Sometimes people have difficulty distinguishing between managerial controls and directive controls because they overlap significantly and are often used interchangeably in cybersecurity contexts. Managerial controls and directive controls are very similar. In most cybersecurity frameworks, including CompTIA Security Plus, these terms refer to a lot of the same category of controls, those that are policy-based and provide guidance for how security should be implemented. Different security frameworks use different terminology. Some sources treat directive as a subset of managerial. Others use them as completely synonymous terms, so it can be very easy to get confused. The CompTIA objectives do list them as separate items, but they function similarly. When you see either term, think policies, procedures, and governance documents that tell people what to do. Both managerial and directive controls are document-based, policies, procedures, and standards. They both provide guidance and direction to people. They both establish rules and requirements, and they both come from management or leadership, and they both tell people how to implement security or what they should do. Key phrases that indicate either managerial or directive are security policy states, procedures require, management directive, company guidelines specify, training program mandates, and organizational requirements. Mostly you'll just want to focus on recognizing when a control is policy, guidance-based, managerial or directive, versus technology-based, technical or human action-based, operational. If an exam question forces you to choose between managerial and directive, look for context clues. So directive, perhaps, hopefully you don't have them making you choose between the two of those. Possible that your test question might include both in a scenario where neither is actually the answer. But just in case, if they do try to make you choose between the two, you might want to think of directive as telling people what to do and what not to do. Policy states employee must, procedure requires users to, guidelines direct staff to, and training instructs personnel to. Look at behavioral guidance and rules like user behavior expectations, acceptable use policies, code of conduct, do this, don't do that language, and direct commands or instructions like imperative language, must, shall, and required, step-by-step directions or specific behavioral requirements, and perhaps managerial if the scenario emphasizes governance and oversight framework, management establishes, executive leadership defines, organizational structure requires, governance framework includes, there's strategic planning and decision-making, risk assessment processes, security program management, resource allocation decisions, strategic security objectives, and administrative oversight functions, background checks, personnel security, audit requirements, compliance monitoring. One potential memory trick is directive equals directing behavior. Do this. Managerial, management activities, planning, oversight, governance. So an example could be directive would be policy requires all employees to lock their workstations when leaving. Managerial might be management conducts annual risk assessments to determine security requirements. Well, now let's think about fundamental concepts of the CIA triad, of the AAA framework, of non-repudiation, and zero trust. We'll talk about honeypots, honey nuts, and honey files. And these fundamental concepts make up about 40% of Domain 1. The security controls questions we just covered make up about 35% of Domain 1. The foundation of information security rests on 3 pillars known as the CIA triad. Every security decision you make should consider these three elements. Confidentiality is what the C stands for. This ensures that information is accessible only to authorized individuals. Think of confidentiality as keeping secrets safe. Methods to maintain confidentiality include encryption to scramble data so unauthorized users cannot read it, access controls that verify user identity before granting access, data classification systems that label information based on sensitivity, and need-to-know principles that limit access to essential personnel only. On exam questions, confidentiality is about protecting information from unauthorized disclosure or viewing. Look for scenarios involving data breaches, unauthorized access, information leakage, eavesdropping, data exposure, or questions asking how to protect sensitive information from being seen by the wrong people. If someone shouldn't be able to read or see the data, you're dealing with confidentiality. The I is integrity. This ensures that information remains accurate and hasn't been tampered with. Integrity is about trust. You need to trust that the data you're using has not been modified. We maintain integrity through digital signatures that verify data hasn't been altered, through hash functions that create unique fingerprints of data, through version control systems that track changes, and through input validation that prevents malicious data entry. For exam questions about integrity, look for scenarios involving data modification, tampering, or corruption. Watch for phrases like data has been altered, or file corruption, unauthorized changes, tampering, data modification, or ensuring data accuracy. If the question is about whether you can trust that the data is still correct and hasn't been changed inappropriately, you're dealing with integrity. And finally, the A in the CIA triad is availability. This ensures information and systems are accessible when needed by authorized users. Availability means your systems work when you need them. We ensure availability through redundant systems that provide backup capabilities, load balancing that distributes work across multiple systems, disaster recovery plans that restore operations after incidents, regular maintenance that prevents system failures. On exam questions, availability focuses on system uptime and accessibility. Look for scenarios involving system downtime, service outages, denial of service attacks, or DDoS, or just DOS. DDoS is distributed denial of service. DOS is just denial of service. So it's a difference between being attacked by one or many is distributed. Continuing on with availability, system failures is another key phrase. Business continuity, even disaster recovery could be related. If the question is about keeping systems running, preventing outages, or ensuring users can access systems when they need them, you're dealing with availability. We have authentication, authorization, and accounting, AAA. These three concepts work together to control access to systems and track user activities. Authentication verifies who you are. It's the process of confirming user identity. Authentication methods include something you know, like passwords or PINs, something you have, like smart cards or tokens, something you are, like biometrics, like fingerprints, eyes, facial recognition, somewhere you are, like location-based authentication. Usually that would just be a feeding factor. Multi-factor authentication combines two or more of these methods for stronger security. Two-factor authentication is two, multi-factor is two or more. For exam questions about authentication, look for scenarios that involve proving or verifying identity. Watch for phrases like user login, identity verification, prove who you are, username and password, biometric scan, smart card, or multi-factor authentication. If the question is asking how to confirm someone is who they claim to be before they get access to anything, you're dealing with authentication. The next A is authorization. This determines what you can do after authentication succeeds. So first, are you who you say you are? And next, authorization. What are you supposed to be allowed to do? Authorization controls access to resources based on role-based access control, RBAC, that assigns permissions based on job functions. Attribute based access control, ABAC, considers multiple factors. Mandatory access control, MAC, based on security classifications. So you really need to look for context because sometimes people see MAC and they immediately think MAC address, but in this case, MAC stands for Mandatory Access Control based on security classifications, and it's associated with authorization of the three A's. And then Discretionary Access Control, DAC, where owners control access. On exam questions, authorization is about permissions and access rights after identity is confirmed. Look for scenarios involving user permissions, access rights, role assignments, file permissions, resource access, or what a user can do. The third A in the AAA framework is accounting, also called auditing. This tracks what you did by recording user activities. Accounting provides audit trails that show who accessed what and when. It provides non-repudiation that prevents users from denying their actions, and compliance reporting that demonstrates regulatory adherence, and forensic evidence for investigating security incidents. For exam questions about accounting or auditing, look for scenarios involving tracking, logging, or recording activities. Watch for phrases like audit logs, activity tracking, forensic investigation, compliance reporting, who did what when, or user activity records if the question is about keeping records of what users have done or investigating past actions. You're dealing with accounting. When you think of accounting, think of accountability. And as a part of accounting, we just mentioned non-repudiation. Now, non-repudiation prevents someone from denying they performed an action. It's like having a digital receipt that proves what happened. We achieve non-repudiation through digital signatures that cryptographically link actions to users, through audit logs that cannot be modified after creation, through timestamps that prove when actions occurred, and through chain of custody procedures that protect evidence integrity. On exam questions, non-repudiation is about proving someone did something and preventing them from denying it later. So non-repudiation can mean proving that you did something good or bad, but it can also mean proving that you didn't do it and somebody else did, vice versa. And you can't have non-repudiation if you don't have the integrity of your data. But non-repudiation does help ensure that whoever did something or didn't is accountable for their actions. So look for scenarios involving digital signatures, cannot deny, proof of action, legal evidence, undeniable proof, or binding commitment. If the question asks how to ensure someone cannot later claim they didn't do something, or how to provide legal proof of actions, you're dealing with non-repudiation. Zero Trust is a security model based on the principle never trust, always verify. Traditional security models trust users who are inside the network perimeter, but Zero Trust assumes no inherent trust. Key principles include verify explicitly using multiple data sources, apply least privilege access, giving users only what they need, assume breach, and design systems to limit damage. So how do you handle it if somebody is already inside your system? If they're already inside your network, do they just have free-for-all then? Or do you have zero trust in place? For exam questions about zero trust, look for scenarios that emphasize continuous verification and no inherent trust. Watch for phrases like never trust, always verify, continuous authentication, least privilege, microsegmentation, assume breach, or verify every access request. If the question describes treating all users and devices as potentially untrusted, regardless of their location, you're dealing with zero trust principles. Now, sometimes a part of security defense is deception and disruption technology. These technologies use misdirection to confuse and delay attackers. You've got honeypots, which are fake systems designed to attract and trap attackers. They serve multiple purposes. They're for detecting intrusion attempts, for gathering intelligence about attack methods, for diverting attackers from real systems, and for providing early warning of threats. On exam questions, honeypots are about deception and attracting attackers to fake systems. You want to look for scenarios involving fake systems, decoy servers, key phrases like trap attackers, attract malicious activity, gather intelligence, or divert covert attacks. If the question describes intentionally creating fake or vulnerable-looking systems to lure attackers away from real assets, then you're dealing with honeypots or deception technology. Now, honey-nets are networks of honeypots that create more realistic fake environments to study attackers' behavior in detail. For exam questions about honeynets, look for scenarios involving networks of fake systems or more complex deception environments. Watch for phrases like network of honeypots, fake network environment, study attacker behavior, realistic decoy network, or comprehensive deception. If the question describes multiple connected fake systems working together to create a believable network environment for research purposes, you're dealing with honeynets. Honey files is another. These are fake files with enticing names placed throughout systems to detect unauthorized access attempts. On exam questions, honey files are all about file-based deception to detect unauthorized access. Look for scenarios involving fake files, decoy documents, enticing file names, bait files, detect file access, or canary files. If the question describes placing fake files with attractive names like passwords.txt or confidential_data.xlsx to alert when someone accesses them inappropriately, you're dealing with honey files. So then 15% of Domain 1 is about change management. Change management ensures modifications to systems don't introduce security vulnerabilities or disrupt operations. The process typically includes change request documentation describing what needs to change and why. This should include descriptions of the proposed changes, business justification and benefits, risk assessment and mitigation strategies, implementation timeline, and resources needed. For exam questions about change requests, look for scenarios involving the initial documentation phase of change management. Watch for phrases like request for change proposal, what needs to be changed, business justification, risk assessment, or proposed modification. If the question asks about documenting or requesting a change before it happens, rather than implementing or approving it, you're dealing with change requests. Change approval is a formal review process involving stakeholders who evaluate security implications of the proposed change and business impact and potential disruptions, and resource requirements and costs, and alignment with organizational policies. On exam questions, change approval involves the formal review and decision-making process. Look for scenarios involving change control board, approval process, stakeholder review, evaluate risks, approve or deny, or change committee. If the question asks about reviewing, evaluating, or making decisions about whether a proposed change should proceed, you're dealing with change approval. And then change implementation is controlled deployment following approved procedures. This includes testing in isolated environments first, phased rollouts to minimize impact, backup plans and rollback procedures, monitoring and validation during deployment. For exam questions about change implementation, look for scenarios involving the actual deployment of approved changes. Watch for phrases like deploy the change, rollout procedure, testing phase, phased implementation, rollback plan, or monitoring deployment. If the question asks about actually making the change happen after it's been approved, including testing, deployment methods, or backup plans, you're dealing with change implementation, implementing change. And then change documentation is recording all aspects of the change process. What was changed and when? Who authorized and implemented changes? What were the test results and the validation evidence? And what were the lessons learned and improvement opportunities? On exam questions, change documentation involves recording and tracking the entire change process. Look for scenarios involving change records, audit trail, documentation requirements, tracking changes, lessons learned, or change history. If the question asks about keeping records of what happened during the change process, who did what, or capturing information for future reference, that sounds like change documentation. So we've got technical implications because changes can affect security in multiple ways. Configuration changes is one, as modifying system settings can inadvertently open security vulnerabilities. vulnerabilities. Security controls might be disabled. Compatibility issues might be encountered. And system performance might be impacted by configuration changes. For your exam questions about configuration changes, look for scenarios involving system settings, parameters, or configurations being modified. Watch for phrases like system configuration, settings changes, parameter modifications, configuration drift, baseline deviation, or security settings. If the question describes changing how systems are set up or configured and asks about potential security impacts, you're dealing with configuration change management. When you have software updates, installing new software or updates can certainly introduce new vulnerabilities, and it can change behavior unexpectedly of the system, and it can break existing security controls, and it can require configuration updates. On your exam question, software updates involve installing new programs or patches. Watch out for scenarios involving software patches, system updates, application upgrades, firmware updates, security patches, or version upgrades. If the question describes installing new software versions, installing patches, or updates, and asks about potential risk or change management considerations, you're dealing with software update management. We have version control. Version control systems track changes to code, configurations, and documentation. So version control is for maintaining history of all changes. With version control, you can roll back to previous versions. You also can provide accountability for modifications. There's been plenty of times when people have asked me as a person in IT to find out who made that change, and I go straight to version control. And then version control supports collaboration among team members. For exam questions about version control, look for scenarios involving tracking changes to files or systems over time. Watch for phrases like track changes, revision history, rollback capability, previous versions, change tracking, or Git repository. If the question asks about maintaining history of modifications, rolling back to earlier versions, or tracking who made what changes, you're dealing with version control systems. So 10% of Domain 1 is cryptographic solutions. PKI stands for Public Key Infrastructure. PKI provides the framework for using cryptographic keys securely at scale. Think of PKI as a comprehensive key management system. It handles things like CA, which stands for Certificate Authority. The Certificate Authority is the trusted entity that issues digital certificates. CAs do things like verify identities before issuing certificates. They sign certificates to prove authenticity. They maintain certificate revocation lists, and they establish trust relationships. For exam questions about certificate authorities, look for scenarios involving the trusted third party that manages digital certificates. Watch for phrases like CA issues certificates, trusted certificate authority, verify identity, certificate signing, root CA, or certificate chain of trust. If the question asks about who issues, validates, or manages digital certificates, or discusses trust relationships in PKI, the good chance you're dealing with certificate authorities. And then digital certificates. Electronic documents that bind public keys to identities. These digital certificates contain the subject's identity information, the subject's public key, the issuing CA's digital signature, and the validity period and usage restrictions. On exam questions, digital certificates are about binding identities to public keys. Look for scenarios involving X509 certificates, X509, SSL certificates, certificate contains, public key binding, certificate expiration, or certificate validation. If the question asks about electronic documents that prove someone's identity and contain their public key, or discusses certificate contents and validation, you're dealing with digital certificates. And then certificate revocation. That's the process for invalidating certificates before expiration. So revocation, saying this is yours no longer. Certificate revocation lists, CRLs. So if you see CRLs in context, of course, it's certificate revocation lists. And these are published by CAs, the certificate authorities. Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP, online certificate status protocol for real-time checking, and reasons including key compromise or identity changes. For exam questions about certificate revocation, look for scenarios involving invalidating certificates before they expire. Watch for phrases like certificate revoked, CRL checking, OCSP validation, key compromise, certificate no longer valid, or revocation status. If the question asks about making certificates invalid before their expiration date or checking if certificates are still trustworthy, you're likely dealing with certificate revocation. Now let's talk about encryption types. Symmetric encryption. This uses the same key for encryption and decryption. So it's easy to get confused. Asymmetric versus symmetric. A lot of people have trouble with that. Symmetric starts with an S. Same starts with an S. Symmetric encryption uses the same key for encryption and decryption. One single key. So characteristics of symmetric encryption are fast and efficient for large amounts of data. Key distribution challenge in large environments. AES, DES, and 3DES are examples of symmetric encryption. And symmetric encryption is best for encrypting data at rest and in bulk communications. Encrypting data at rest, best for data at rest and in bulk communications. For exam questions about symmetric encryption, look for scenarios emphasizing speed and shared keys. Watch for phrases like same key, shared key, fast encryption, bulk data, AES encryption, or key distribution problem if the question mentions both parties using the identical key or asks about efficient encryption for large amounts of data. You're dealing with symmetric encryption. Oh, through the years, I don't know why, but I used to have the hardest time with remembering symmetric versus asymmetric. So hopefully this is helpful to you. Asymmetric uses different keys for encryption and decryption. So asymmetric encryption solves the key distribution problem, but asymmetric encryption is slower than symmetric encryption. Asymmetric encryption enables digital signatures and key exchange. And examples of asymmetric encryption are RSA, ECC, and Diffie-Hellman. For exam questions about asymmetric encryption, look for scenarios involving public and private key pairs. Whenever there's both a public key and a private key, or there's a key pair instead of individual key, single key, or shared key, like symmetric, asymmetric is public and private, or a key pair. So watch for phrases like public key, private key, key pair, digital signatures, RSA encryption, or solve key distribution, then that's asymmetric. If the question mentions different keys for encryption and decryption, or discusses public key cryptography and digital signatures, you might be dealing with asymmetric encryption. And then we have some advanced cryptographic concepts. Obfuscation. Obfuscation is hiding or disguising code, data, or communications. Code obfuscation makes software harder to reverse engineer. Data obfuscation protects sensitive information in databases. Network obfuscation hides communication patterns, and steganography hides messages within other files. For exam questions about obfuscation, look for scenarios involving hiding or disguising information. Watch for phrases like hide data, disguise code, steganography, data masking, reverse engineering protection, or conceal information. If the question asks about making something harder to understand or detect, rather than encrypting it, you're likely dealing with obfuscation techniques. Now, hashing. Hashing creates fixed length fingerprints of data. I can promise you, having taken so many cybersecurity certification exams, that being able to make the connection between hashing and fixed length is very important. So just remember hashing and fixed length. So hashing also one-way function, then it cannot be reversed. So remember that one way. That is definitely a key phrase. Fixed length is definitely a key phrase. So hashing is a one-way function that cannot be reversed. Hashing is small changes in input create completely different output. And with hashing, it can be used for password storage and data integrity verification. So you'll want to connect those thoughts in your head, data integrity and hashing. Make that connection. for depending on the type of question you're getting asked. Examples of hashing are SHA-256, MD5, which is deprecated, and SHA-3. For exam questions about hashing, look for scenarios involving data integrity verification and one-way functions. Watch for phrases like hash functions, fixed length output, data integrity, password hashing, cannot be reversed, SHA-256, or message digest. That's another one, message digest. Remember that, hashing and message digest. If the question asks about verifying data has not changed or creating unique fingerprints that can't be reversed back to the original, you're dealing with hashing. And digital signatures provide authentication, integrity, and non-repudiation. Digital signatures are created using the sender's private key, and digital signatures are verified using the sender's public key. And digital signatures prove the message came from the claimed sender, and digital signatures show the message has not been altered. For exam questions about digital signatures, look for scenarios involving proving who sent a message and that it has not been changed. Watch for phrases like digital signature, private key signs, public key verifies, prove sender identity, message integrity, or non-repudiation. If the question asks about verifying both who sent something and that it hasn't been tampered with, you're dealing with digital signatures. You've got non-repudiation and integrity, you're dealing with digital signatures. And then we have blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is distributed ledger technology with security applications. There is immutable record keeping. Immutable means unchangeable. Mutable means changeable. Immutable means unchangeable. So immutable record keeping with blockchain technology. Decentralized trust mechanisms. Decentralized, you see that word? You think blockchain. Anytime you see decentralized, make a connection there. Smart contracts for automated agreements. Blockchain technology. Smart contracts, blockchain. And supply chain verification and tracking. For exam questions about blockchain, look for scenarios involving distributed ledgers and immutable records. Watch for phrases like blockchain, distributed ledger, immutable record, decentralized, smart contracts, supply chain tracking, or tamper-proof if the question asks about technology that creates unchangeable records across multiple systems without a central authority. That's what decentralized means. Then you're dealing with blockchain technology. If you've heard of DeFi, you've heard of decentralized finance, DeFi. So let's just go over some exam tips for Domain 1. You should understand control relationships. You want to know how different types of controls work together. For example, a firewall, technical, and preventative. Preventive. I always want to say preventative. I think it's the same. So a firewall works with security policies, which are then managerial and directive, and with security guards, physical and operational potentially. These are relationships between the different kinds of security controls. When you see exam questions asking about comprehensive security strategies, look for answers that combine multiple types of controls. Watch for scenarios that require both technology solutions and human processes, or questions asking what additional controls are needed. The best security approaches use defense in depth with multiple control types working together. Defense in depth means layered security, multiple layers in depth. So the CIA triad application, for any scenario question, ask yourself which element of the CIA triad is the most important and which controls would best protect it. When facing scenario-based questions, use the CIA triad as your analyses framework. Ask yourself, is this primarily about keeping data secret, which means it ties to confidentiality? Or is it about keeping data accurate, which ties to integrity? Or is it about keeping systems running, which ties to availability? Then you choose your controls that specifically address that aspect. If a question mentions data breaches or unauthorized access, think confidentiality. If it mentions data tampering or corruption, think integrity. If it mentions system downtime or denial of service, think availability. And then the AAA sequence. Remember that authentication comes before authorization, and accounting tracks both. You cannot authorize someone whose identity you have not verified. On-exam questions about access control. Always think in sequence. First, verify who they are, authentication. Then determine what they can do, authorization. Because if you don't know who they are, then you don't know what they should be allowed to do. Then track what they did, accounting, accountable. If a question asks about granting permissions without mentioning identity verification, that's a red flag. Authentication must come first. Look for questions that test this logical sequence or ask what's missing from an incomplete access control process. And change management process, understand that proper change management prevents security incidents by ensuring all changes are evaluated for security impact before implementation. When you see exam questions about system changes, updates, or modifications, look for answers that include proper change management steps. Watch for scenarios where changes are made without approval, testing, or documentation. These are often wrong answers. The correct approach always includes risk assessment, approval processes, testing, and rollback plans. If a question describes urgent changes being made immediately without process, that's typically not going to be the best practice answer. And cryptographic use cases. Know when to use symmetric versus asymmetric encryption. And understand that PKI enables secure communications at scale. For exam questions about encryption choices, remember that symmetric is fast and good for bulk data, while asymmetric solves key distribution and enables digital signatures. If a question mentions large amount of data or speed requirements, think symmetric. If it mentions secure key exchange, digital signatures, or communication between strangers, think asymmetric. PKI questions often involve certificates, trust relationships, or secure communications across large organizations or the internet. Let's connect the dots and discuss a few scenarios to reinforce these concepts. In our first scenario, a company wants to ensure only authorized employees can access the building and that all access attempts are recorded. Well, this requires our AAA framework, authentication, key cards, or biometrics to verify identity, for example. Authorization, access control systems that know who can enter where. Accounting, logs that record all access attempts. Why was Bob in the building at 2 a.m.? Now we have scenario 2. A database contains sensitive customer information that must be protected from unauthorized access and tampering. This is going to require our CIA triad, confidentiality, with encryption to protect data from unauthorized viewing, integrity with digital signatures or hashes to detect tampering, and availability with backup systems to ensure data remains accessible. Scenario 3. A software update needs to be deployed across the organization. Proper change management requires what? Risk assessment of the update security implications and testing in a controlled environment and approval from a change control board and a rollback plan in case of problems. If you run a software update, and things don't go well, you need to be able to roll back to the previous version and keep everything running until you can figure out how to get the patch or update applied. So domain 1 establishes the fundamental concepts that everything else in cybersecurity builds upon. You've now got how different types of security controls work together to protect assets. You understand that comprehensive means multiple security controls working together. You've got both the CIA triad and the AAA framework that are guiding security decisions. And don't forget about non-repudiation and the importance of proper change management in maintaining security, and how cryptographic solutions enable secure communications and data protection, but understanding the difference between symmetric and asymmetric. Now, in a few years, in the 2030s, that could all get replaced because of quantum technology, but for now, you still need to understand it for the test. So remembering that if it's fast, you need to do bulk, you need it to be fast, that's symmetric, single key, asymmetric, dual keys, digital signatures, and so on. These concepts are going to appear throughout your Security Plus journey, without a doubt. So ensure that you understand not just what they are, but how they apply in different situations. Remember, security is about layered defense. No single control is sufficient, but the right combination of controls can provide comprehensive protection. As you prepare for the Security Plus exam, keep these overall test-taking strategies in mind. First, read questions carefully and identify the key scenario elements before looking at answer choices. The exam loves to test your ability to apply concepts to real-world situations, not just recall definitions. Second, when you see best or most appropriate in a question, it's possible that all of the answers might be technically correct, but you have to choose the one that's most suitable for that specific scenario. So pay attention to all the words in the question and think through it. What do you have, like 90 minutes to do 90 questions? So you'll go through your questions. Anything that's easy for you, knock it out and take your time on the ones that you need to. I believe in the CompTIA exams, they're still letting you choose to move forward and go backward, but just be careful, make sure that they don't change that. But as long as they don't, then you can go through, you knock out every question you know, and then you go back, you see how much time you've got left, and you figure out how much time you have to spend more carefully reading through all the ones that you've bookmarked. So bookmark, bookmark, bookmark. I do that in every test. And it's only because of that method that I was able to pass all of the CompTIA exams on the first try, because I knocked out what I knew, still tried to be careful, and then I went back, bookmarking everything, and took my time and gave it my best shot. So that's really helpful. A lot of people find that makes a huge difference for them, me included. So third, eliminate obviously wrong answers first. So if you see something that's just no way it's even possibly correct, then don't give it another look, and that means you've narrowed it down to where it could be this one or this one, right? And you don't have to spend any time thinking through the answer options that are not even correct in any way, shape, or form. Then you just figure out which one is most applicable, which one makes the most sense, reread through the paragraph, the scenario to figure it out. And then fourth, watch for questions that combine multiple domains. Domain 1 concepts are definitely foundational, meaning they're going to appear alongside other topics from other domains. So understanding how these fundamentals connect to threats, architecture, and operations is crucial. You're going to see domain 1 concepts in every domain. Finally, manage your time effectively. Don't spend too much time on any single question. If you're unsure, make your best educated guess, mark it for review. The Security Plus exam rewards practical thinking and real-world application of these fundamental concepts.